Rebekah Wineburg of Post and Vine and winemaker of Quintessa out of Napa Valley, California. It is so great to have you here today on the Mr. Wine Guy podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh my God. Thank you for accepting. I was just telling you offline how inspired and how much of an inspiration it is to have you on the podcast. You clearly don't realize how big of a deal you are. And I think you do. You've had so many opportunities to tell your story. And I've read up and learned a lot about you. And I'm really impressed with your story and what you've done. But I think one of the things that really stands out to me about you is your respect for the land, your respect for terroir. And I think that is the thing that kind of sets like really good, great winemakers like yourselves apart from not necessarily somebody that's not a good winemaker, but somebody that doesn't understand what the real process to winemaking is. I think at the end of the day, it boils down to your love and infatuation for the land and not necessarily going in there to be a winemaker to try to pick and choose how that fruit is going to go into the bottle, but you're actually letting the fruit tell you how it wants to go in the bottle, and you do less intervention. You really don't do things that are going to interfere with what that wine's going to do, and you let the terroir speak. And that says a lot about you. And that's just one of the many reasons why I'm excited to have you here today. And I want to say, I'm very thankful to have you. It means a lot to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. What you just said, that's better than anything I could say. I don't know. I'm blushing if you could see. What you said, it touches me very deeply because that is, and especially as I've progressed in my career, that is more and more what I think or what I want to do and what I think the winemaker's role is to try and understand place and then figure out how to steward that process, that transformation of grapes into wine, and the doing less at this actually harder than doing more.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You want to get involved, right? You naturally want to put your hands in there because you have something special within yourself. I wouldn't use the word manipulate, but you almost want to intervene in such a way, but it's almost like you have to reserve a little bit and step back.
I think it's really hard to not be in control.
Yeah.
And it's like, for instance, native fermentations, which I've done for a long time, they can be really scary. Like the beginning of them, is it going to actually happen? You don't know. And it's a lot more comfortable to inoculate and to say, okay, this is when the fermentation starts versus what I do is you warm it up and you're like, okay, is it going to happen?
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a longer time. That being said, it's also really important to understand the steps, like the process and where you should intervene and where you should step back and let things happen. Because if you do absolutely nothing, you can get some really bad wine and then ruin the potential.
Yeah. And what's funny is this harvest is one of those harvests too, where you have to step back and you don't want to be eager, especially with the fruit hanging longer than normal. We're coming into Halloween and there's red fruit. Is there still white fruit out? It's just one of those things where you kind of have to step back.
I think there is. So it just rained today, but I'm pretty sure that there's still Chardonnay out on the vine, which is a little scary. I think, yeah. So late harvests are hard because you want to get started. Every year when I start the first pick of the year, calling that first pick is really scary because I always feel, to speak for myself, I always feel like I'm jumping the gun. Am I calling this pick because I'm ready to get started and we need to do something? And maybe it does, maybe you are a little bit, but you have to because a lot of winemaking, and especially in a year like 2023, which is both exceptional quality, late starting, late season, and larger. There's quite a bit of fruit out there. There's a lot of logistics that goes into this.
Hey, so one question I wanted to ask you, I don't know when the podcast starts, I just start going, new questions pop up. So you've been in the wine industry since 2002, if you think of Ornellaia, interning overseas abroad, but what would you compare this vintage to in terms of quality to another vintage that you have personal experience with?
So I think that it is, in terms of both being high quality and higher quantity, it's not like It's not so large that it's scary. Like things are not dilute, but it's certainly generous. That's a lot like 2018.
Yeah.
And being the season itself progressed very mild, like very late. We didn't have a lot of heat in the spring or the summer. We've gotten this late heat, but up until, say, some of mid-September, it was tracking like 2011 or 1998.
Yeah.
And then this late heat, so this wonderful later season heat, which helps kick the ripening, kick that phenolics to the next level, is a little bit like 2013. And I'm thinking more of 13 in the winery, not in terms of there's great density to the structure. It's not as big and brawny as a 2013, but and this is something like during winemaking and then in the final grapes, I'm not sure you see it, but the extraction is really easy. Yeah. It's a sign of right phenolics, of good maturity in the grapes to have the extraction in the tanks be really easy. There's not really a risk, I don't think, of over extracting this year. And you don't have to work too hard to get where you want to be with the wine. So
yeah,
exciting.
Port Inward was in the Dr. Crane Vineyard, and he recently posted about how he thinks he's been in the wine industry for 47 years, which is crazy. He thinks that this is I got the impression he thinks this is one of the best vintages that he's probably ever experienced. If you consider that this vintage hasn't finished yet, that says a lot, right? There's a lot to when somebody like him is saying with 47 years experience that this is one of the best vintages.
Yeah. And I would agree with him. I think 2019 was one of the recent best vintages in terms of what's up on the market. Certainly 2021 is really exciting to me, but I think 23 has the potential to be better than that.
That's super cool. So thanks for sharing a little bit about that. We were going to talk about that later, but I'm glad we got to chat about that from the front. But I want to talk about you growing up. So the Rebekah Wineburg that we know today was not the Rebekah Wineburg when you were a child trying to figure out what you wanted to do. I think you wanted to go into research biology, some sort of biology and chemistry major. But
yeah, I was definitely a dorky little kid. Yeah.
Hey, you know what though? Dorky kids, they make it happen.
I'm not dorky. I like science. I find it interesting.
Oh man, when I was in school, science and math were never interesting to me, but I was definitely dorky. I didn't need the subjects to be dorky. I was super dorky. I was nerdy. But your parents, they took you on a trip to Napa. So you go to Napa, I believe you're 16. You have no idea what's going on. I don't know. Talk a little bit about your parents. Were they into wine? Was this just a random trip? And talk about what was it that specifically inspired you at the age of 16 of all times in your life? You don't even realize you're trying to figure it out. And all of a sudden you're like, this is special. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it was a spring break trip to San Francisco. My father had a conference and we took a day trip up to Napa Valley with one of his colleagues Michael Houlihan, who's from Australia, is Australian. And Michael is very into wine, so much so that he had gone to winemaking school, even though he was an attorney. And he's the one talking to me. We're at touring the wineries, standing at the back of the tour, because of course I'm 16.
Yeah.
Having little sips of wine. And he's talking to me about how wine is made, the chemistry of winemaking. And that's what first fascinated me. It made me realize up until then, I thought I would be a research biologist, fantasizing about where I would take my sabbatical. Every little girl does.
Yeah.
And it was the first time it made me realize that winemaking was something and some connection where I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is a cool city, but Napa Valley is so beautiful.
Right, yeah.
I could be connected to the land. I could be working with science, but also having a product at the end. And it just planted this little seed in my head. And even though my last name is Wineburg, and my parents drank wine, but I was not raised by wine collectors. And so it just stayed in my head and I kept this as a potential idea and I thought it sounded cool. I also thought it sounded cool, I'll be honest.
Yeah, totally.
Instead of being a chemist or a biologist. And then when I was in undergrad, so I did study chemistry and biology as an undergrad, I told one of my chemistry professors who I'd become close with about my interest in winemaking. And he is a wine lover and subscribed to Wine Spectator. And he thought that was really great. And he encouraged me towards this. And he is the one who told me how to try it out, how to make a career, how to go. It's great. You go work a harvest after you graduate. And then you go to UC Davis for a master's and you study viticulture and enology. And I was like, all right, that sounds great. He was the person who told me how to take this random little idea. And I'm in college in Minnesota, so not really close to the wine industry there either, and how to make it into a reality.
Michael and your chemistry professor, I feel like they shed some sort of joy on you as well. So there was this mysterious kind of thing about wine and you were intrigued, but there was this joy that your chemistry professor and Michael were sharing. And so, when you think about that story, I want to say when I was reading up that you put the idea of being in the wine industry to the side. You're like on the East Coast. You're not really thinking like, how am I going to even do that? It sounded like a good idea at the moment. And then the joy that Michael had, and then going to school, the joy that your chemistry professor had, I would say, and let me know if you would agree, that level of joy and love for wine also had something to do with the intrigue that you had to learn how to even study or make wine, right?
I think that's exactly right. It's as someone who's always enjoyed understanding how things work, like the why behind it. There's a lot of that in wine. Not everyone and not every great winemaker has to care. You don't have to know about phenolic chemistry to make great wine or to enjoy wine. But for me, it does add another layer. And the more you know, the more mysterious it is. I think that's one thing that wine provides so much to the world. So I do feel like making wines, I am part of something bigger than myself. And you do get to share your joy in it. You get to provide joy to other people. And you get to be part of this sort of mysterious transformation.
Yeah. Every year you know what to expect. The textbook kind of reads the same, but every year, everything is dependent on Mother Nature and even labor. Things can be dependent on labor and what you're seeing. And if things change, drastic changes, heat, cold, things like that, how the off season is reacting to the spring and the bud break and all that. And so you're rewriting based on your pick and plays like a coach or like a playmaker. And it's probably really exciting. I don't know if you know this or not, but I was an intern at Staglin and you
Well,
were the
I had
enologist
a
at Staglin. So
early in
that's
my
super cool.
career. Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have a little bit of a
Yeah.
connection there.
Spent
Before
a lot
you
of
went
time in those caves.
oh my God, 25,000 square feet. Man, it was fun going all the way in the back and
Yeah.
doing all kinds of different things. It was an incredible experience. The Staglins are such amazing people, and knowing we have that correlation. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that real quick. I was gonna jump into Rudd, but talk about Staglin.
Staglin was my first full-time job because in the wine industry, you can go to school or not go to school, but then even if you have a degree, you still have to work stages or
Uh-huh.
internships to gain experience. And getting that very first full-time job was a really big deal. And so that we was the enologist at Staglin. And at the time, it was a really small crew. It was just me and the winemaker in production.
Wow.
And I learned so much. I was alone in those caves, putting barrels up.
It's crazy, just the
Yeah.
2 of you. That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have had more people.
You know what? If I
I'm
didn't
so
choose to
thrilled.
go in the military, if I would have known anything, I would have taken the call and been out there trying to get my start at Staglin. What was that? 14 years sooner. That's crazy.
That's
That was 20 years ago.
no, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So backing up a little bit, you studied abroad for a couple of different places. You were in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, but you were also in Italy at Ornellaia. Was there some sort of inspiration when you were in Australia? I feel like there was a winemaker that kind of
So
inspired you.
it was actually so I went this was when I was an undergraduate. I went and did a semester in Australia.
Mhm.
And before school started, I went and I lived with this friend of my father, Michael Houlihan, and his family,
Okay.
and got to work in a vineyard with a friend of his for the harvest. So this was my very first job in the wine industry. I did one of I'd say almost like worst, most difficult jobs. We were putting nets on the vines. It's hot because this is the middle of summer. The vines are really tall. I'm not that tall. And you're just like wrapping them around and tying them up. And then, of course, it's Australia. So every animal in the vineyard can kill you.
Yeah, for sure.
And got my first sunburn of my life. But I had such a great time. And so that was that first little bit. And so it comes back to this friend, Michael Houlihan, who connected me there. And then I went to school, finished, and then I did go work a harvest in Monterey County before going to UC Davis. But when I was at Davis, so I'm already interested in being in wine, and I was drinking wine and tasting wines. Didn't have a huge budget. I'm a grad student. So every time my father would come to visit, he would take me out to lunch for a meal. And this is where I got the Ornellaia connection. Which
this is such a funny story.
It's still to this day, it doesn't even sound like real, or it's just bizarre. So I'm already into wine, think I want to be a winemaker. It was already past that point when I've had the first aha wine, the first wine that changed my life. And I'm at lunch with my father in San Francisco, and I order a half bottle of Brunello off of the wine list. It's lunchtime, there's only 2 of us. And the sommelier comes back and tells me, he's so sorry, they don't have this wine, but they have this other wine. And he says it really fast. And he's saying it like I'm 23 years old. I don't really know that much. And he's saying things like I'm supposed to know what he's talking about. And I just cover it like you do in a restaurant.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
You're like, yes, that will be lovely. And he brings out this wine and he pours it. And it was transformative. This was like nothing I had ever tasted before. I knew that this wine was something special. It had a soul. Yeah. And I needed to learn more about it. And it was the 1998 Ornellaia.
Wow.
So I went back to UC Davis, like I'm still in school that Monday, and I enroll in Italian 101 and decide I want to go work in Italy. I apply. Of course, I'm old enough that you mailed resumes and cover letters in the mail.
Yeah, I'm that age too.
Hope that somebody got it, right?
Yeah.
Your fancy paper. And the only place that called me was Ornellaia.
That's insane. When you talk about serendipitous moments, I've said this word a lot for this season already with the interviews that I've done. You think about the fact serendipitously you went to California, you went to Napa, you experienced this wine. Michael helped encourage you to really love and appreciate the wine. Your chemistry professor was fascinated with wine and helped guide you and encouraged you to go work the harvest. And you're in Australia. And now you're trying this wine and the sommelier he's recommending the wine. And all of these things are literally weaving their way. This is absolutely what you're meant to do. And when I sit back and I think about your story, I think there was no way in the world Rebekah Wineburg was going to be doing anything else, especially because you're so amazing at what you do. Wouldn't you agree that the wine industry has a funny way of putting things together?
I mean, it's a really small industry worldwide. And that, I look back on it. I'm sure this is true for everyone and everything they do. If you really think about it, how many coincidences have to line up?
Yeah.
I would not be where I am today working with the kind of wines that I am if that Brunello hadn't been sold out of that wine list. I would be a winemaker, but I could be doing something completely different.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because when I was trying to learn as much as I could about you for this interview, I didn't even know until after we had arranged the interview today that you were at Staglin. And so I'm sitting here thinking about all these kind of ways that the wine industry weaves its way. It's just crazy how these kind of things happen and they just work out the way that they should.
I know. While you're in them, it doesn't always feel that way.
No, you're right.
But I remember starting out in this industry and being a woman and trying to find those first jobs were so hard to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have someone take a chance on you.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you look back at it, things do work out.
They do. When you think about I believe it was 2002, Ornellaia, looking at your winemaking career, what are some of the things that you learned being abroad, being in Italy, learning some of the winemaking techniques that they used over there, learning about the terroir over there? What are some of those things that you've used to this day, or some of the people that you've met that encouraged you that have really allowed you to be the better winemaker that you are today?
I think it's the estate or the terroir focus. So being very specific to your place.
Mhm.
And I saw that at Ornellaia for the first time. It wasn't just a brand they were making, and it wasn't just like for what the market wants, that this is that place.
Yeah.
And nobody lives life better. Nobody knows how to enjoy life better than the Italians.
Oh, for sure. My wife
And
is
that's
Sicilian.
something. Oh, okay. Then you have that. You're lucky you have this influence all the time. I have to sometimes sit back and remind myself, you know what? It's okay. You can take an hour lunch.
Mhm.
And the Italians, we're working harvest. They'll take your lunch the
Yeah.
full time. You enjoy it, that
Mhm.
they're doing something because, and the love that you have and the enjoyment that you have, that also affects, I think that also affects how the wine tastes.
Yeah.
Um,
I wouldn't say it's a balance, but I think you're filling your cup in a different way. You're in your moment, you're in your zone when you're making wine, when you're doing what you have to do to stay focused. But you're also having that time to really unwind, like you said. And I like the fact that you appreciate that, because I think in an industry, especially when it's off season and you're not busy, and then all of a sudden it's just like you're slammed. Like when I worked at Staglin, I told this to a bunch of people, but there was 2017 harvest. I was in the military. I was a firefighter. I have never worked harder in my life than I did when I was an intern working production at a 25,000 square foot cave winery. You need that downtime.
yeah. Yeah. And you need to remember, I think I also I'm tired, certainly now toward the end of harvest. It would be nice to sleep more than 6 hours.
Mhm.
But it's also a little bit like, and you might get this in the military and certainly firefighting, it's a little bit like summer camp in a way.
Yeah.
If this is what you got everyone that you work with, we have the same goal and we need to do it until it's done. And you just get into this rhythm and you get to really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it's hard to talk to people during harvest who are not in harvest.
Yeah. That's why I was like, I picked the perfect time to try to together the season with interviews. Cause I'm like, yeah, I'm like super patient because I know what's going on. I'm like, whenever you have the time, take a look at the calendar. And if you find a time that works for you, and I won't hear from them for 10 days, 12 days. And I'm like, hey, friendly reminder, if you if you've had a chance, no problem. I know you're busy. So yeah, it is like summer camp. But let's jump in and talk about Rudd. You were at Rudd. You started there as an intern, if I'm not mistaken. You actually did
Yeah.
become the assistant winemaker. It's funny too. I don't know if you know this. I interviewed Natalie Bath for Crossroads by Rudd. And having this Rudd moment on the podcast is
Yeah.
pretty cool because I love Rudd. Talk
Oh,
about your time there. And if you could also share a story about the late, great Leslie Rudd.
oh, Leslie Rudd. Yeah. Rudd was like my second university. I came back from working in Italy and I wanted to get a full only cellar experience because I had degrees in chemistry and biology. I had a master's degree. I had worked in Italy and I'd worked on phenolics, and I knew it'd be very easy to get stuck in a more lab
Mhm.
position. And that was my comfort zone. I knew that. And so I wanted to do a cellar only job. And so that's when I went to work the harvest at Rudd.
Mhm.
And I think I was the first female that they had ever had in the cellar.
Yeah.
And it was the coolest group of guys. It was so much fun. Just working in the cellar all day. I loved cleaning drains, dragging hoses. I got so strong. And then when that harvest was over, I left, and that's when I went to Staglin.
Right.
And then when they were looking at Rudd, their enologist was leaving. She's actually a friend of mine. She's
Mhm.
up in Washington State now, Erica Orr, great winemaker. And she was leaving to go to Washington. And they called me and they're like, "Hey, Rebekah, would you want to come back to be our enologist?" And I was like, "Yes, this is perfect." It felt like home.
Yeah.
And so I stayed there and became the assistant winemaker. And Rudd gave me so much opportunity to grow. And Leslie Rudd was this like huge figure. He was very gentle in the way he spoke, but also very big and forceful personality.
Yeah.
And his drive was like, you could feel it. And so you just like that kind of force of will. And I always remember he had this sign that said, "Even the donkey could make great grapes from these, or great wine from these grapes." And that was like, he was always like, "This is great, but can we do more? I mean,
Yeah.
how can we yeah, how can we continue to improve and then continue to learn? And that, yeah, that was pretty wonderful. That was lovely for him to give me that opportunity.
I think I heard Scott Becker say once that how can we improve even 2%? I don't remember where I heard this from. I was just reminded of that because you're operating at 98%. And if you're wanting to improve even better, that's huge. That says that you're
Art.
committed. And that sounds like Leslie when he instilled that on you. And
Yeah.
that's a credit to him and a credit to you because I feel like you do what you willingly take it with you, but you also subconsciously just carry that with you and you act on instinct. If you're in a moment and you're making Post and Vine or Quintessa, you're going to try to improve, even if it's at 2%, like Scott said.
Yeah. And then and defining, there's another person that I worked for. So when I actually first came back to Italy, I still had to finish writing my thesis.
Mhm.
And my husband now, is living in Berkeley. So I went and I lived with him and I worked in a wine shop. And it's a little wine shop called Paul Marcus Wines in
Mhm.
Oakland.
Yeah.
And Paul Marcus is this cool, great um, wine lover, successful wine shop, mostly imports. He's this Berkeley hippie.
Yeah.
And Paul also taught me, I carried to this, I have to remind myself about this like every month. Like you, so there is this, you want to always improve. I'm a naturally driven person. I do want to improve every year, but you also have to define what success means for you.
Mhm.
So is it an external measure of success? Are you chasing points? Are you trying to identify what it is that you want to do? And I think for wine, that's also important. I always do want to improve, but improvement or reaching that final 2% for Post and Vine has a different shape to it than for Quintessa.
Yeah.
And that's really fun too, to have those two different projects going.
Those projects are so different, but with your hand on them, they still have that same drive. They still have that same focus. You're still focused on that terroir. There's a lot of history to the Post and Vine terroir. But before we talk about Post and Vine and even Quintessa, you were actually the head winemaker at Buccella from '09 to, I want to say, 15. How
Mhm.
did that prepare you to become the winemaker, not for Post and Vine, because that's your
Mhm.
brand, but to become the winemaker to where you are today at Quintessa?
Yeah. So I learned a lot there. Bucella's the one place that I worked in, the one winery I worked at that is not estate or not single vineyard.
Mhm.
And Post and Vine, it's not an estate, but they're single vineyard expressions. At Buccella, we made 3 wines and then a 4th wine, which I developed with them. They're mixed blacks, is
Mhm.
about getting or finding vineyards that are of this, that can fit this style, this ideal wine that was in the owner's head.
Right.
And that taught me actually a lot about terroir, because to define what you're looking for and then to think about what kind of vineyard can deliver that in the right way. You don't like, and it's the same with Quintessa. With Quintessa, I'm starting with the land. So understanding what Quintessa is, and then how do you make it as a wine to respect that. But Buccella, it's the same thing, just coming from a different direction.
Yeah.
That you're starting with this wine that you want to make, and then you figure out, how do I find the vineyard that is that wine? You don't ever want to try to put a square peg in a round hole. You're
Yeah.
never going to get there.
Yeah.
And so the challenge with Buccella was trying to find those vineyards that could make this wine, which was rich and big and black, and Buccella means mouthful. That was very hedonistic, with a level of sophistication and elegance to it, of
Mhm.
refinement. You do both of those things. And so I thought the answer was looking for cooler part of Napa. So that all that fruit was from Yountville and south,
Mhm.
the cooler areas where you can get those black fruit character without getting raisined or pruny notes. So you can maintain freshness while still having black fruit character.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you said that because I feel like that's almost an expression of Post and Vine, but I feel like Post and Vine started back at Rudd. So
Sure.
it started with a relationship with the owners of the Testa Vineyard. And when you think about Post and Vine, I'm excited to jump into this. Like I've been thinking about Post and Vine. I'm ready. Post and Vine is so intriguing to me. You started this brand with your friend who you worked with at the time, Erica Kincaid.
Yes,
And
at
so
Runs.
at Rudd, and the Testa Vineyard in the family had something to do with this whole correlation, but it didn't start until 2012. So talk about
Yeah.
Post and Vine, and what does Post and Vine mean?
Post and Vine. So I started that with Erica Kincaid, my friend, and then we had met when we both worked at Rudd.
Yeah.
The name, it was hard to come up with a name actually, and we didn't want to use our names. But what we both love about wine is the way that it can make connections. And we wanted Post and Vine was started really out of this love for the Testa Vineyard, and wanting to work with and help promote these special old wine vineyards that at the time, and they're getting a little bit more attention now, but still want to give them the respect that they deserve, I think, and that they're an important part of our heritage here in California. And I had been introduced to Testa at Rudd. It was part of the eventual project, which was the sort of side project from Rudd.
Yeah.
We made a port from the Testa Carignan and Tizera, and that was a crazy process. But here I am working in the cellar, working on the crush pad, and I see this fruit come across the crush pad, and it says Testa, and it says Carignan, and on the crush sheet, and I'm like, what the hell is this? Never seen anything like it, and I was fascinated with it. I wanted to learn more. I really liked brambly black fruit character of it, the bright acidity, and it has it's a level of rusticity, really.
It's a Spanish origin fruit, if I'm not
Right.
mistaken. It's
That's
got
correct.
like a ton of fruit. Like it's a very fruit forward grape.
Yes. Yeah, and it's Spanish origin, but it's like Catalonia. And I just learned this recently because it's also in France. I didn't realize the connection was that historically that was all part of one kingdom.
Oh, see, there we go again. More serendipity.
Yes, that it was all part of one kingdom. And so that kind of, the history, wine and history is really interesting. But yeah, I found those grapes and I never forgot about it. And I got to know the Martinson family, which are the owners of Testa. It's the Maria Testa Martinson. And I wanted to try and make my own wine, really, because I wanted to help Testa Vineyard get out there in the world and share what I thought was special about it. And that's the meaning of Post and Vine, is that these are the connections that people make when they are drinking wine and sharing wine, the connection that wine can have you with a place. Think about that experience I had with Ornellaia. I tasted this wine and I needed to go to Italy. It made me have to make a trip. And so I wanted to be part of that. And I also wanted to learn more about the wine business. Because when you're just the winemaker of a wine, you're not responsible for compliance. And now I wish I wasn't responsible for compliance. Making a business plan, creating a label, choosing packages, getting licensed, all of that.
That's cool.
I think it makes me a better winemaker.
It does. It's like going to work a harvest, doing an internship. It's that whole idea that you want to become a better winemaker. And then when you correlate that to creating your own label, but also making wine as you look forward, you're wanting to become a better winemaker by learning and understanding more. And it's cool because it's a full circle. If you think about Rudd in 02, 03, and then now you find yourself in 2012. But I'm very fascinated about your wines. You actually make your wine, Post and Vine, from 3 different vineyards. You make it from Testa, and you make it from Sandy Lane and Mule Plain. I'm really intrigued by Sandy Lane because Sandy Lane, there's tons of history, lots of terroir, tons of history to these vineyards. Sandy Lane was originally planted back in 1888. It's dry farmed. Lodi is where you'll find the Mule Plain vineyard. But talk about, so Post and Vine has an identity that is much different than the identity to Quintessa. So you're doing 2 different things at once in terms of identity for wines, even though you're doing the same thing. So talk about the identity of Post and Vine and what makes it so special to you as the winemaker.
Yeah. So at Post and Vine, it's exclusively these old vine vineyards. And they are often in these areas that have been forgotten. So there's so much history there. Like it's like, I don't know, it's a history and an anthropology class.
Yeah.
And a viticulture class put together. So why does Contra Costa and Lodi have so many of these old vines? One is that they were the original places that these vines were planted. And then also they survived through Prohibition because those varieties are transportable. People could make home wine. They are on the train tracks that go back east. So they could harvest, pack the grapes, and ship them onto the trains for home winemakers. So they survived Prohibition that way. And then they never became popular in this first resurgence of the American wine scene. Yeah. So there was no there had been these great old vines in Napa. The Napa land is too valuable to leave lower producing old vine vineyards. People would say it's crazy. Those old vine vineyards were not the varieties that are popular now. They were Chenin Blanc and Napa Gamay and those kind of things. Nobody's going to keep that here in Napa because Napa got popular, everything got ripped out, and it got replanted to Bordeaux varieties.
Yeah.
But they never got popular.
The thing about it is I love the old, this is going back to what I was saying in the beginning of the podcast, is you have this kind of I didn't say this, but you have this romanticism about the beginning, if you will, or what wine was before it was what it is today. All these old vines, terroir. You're very focused on kind of the specific mission of the vineyard. And so it's interesting that you were so eager to run to these vineyards and to make your wine when you were just telling the story about how Napa became this Bordeaux varietal Cabernet.
As winemaker, I want people to drink the wines I make. And I love making beautiful wines and that are worth a lot of money and are very special. But those aren't the wines you open up on Wednesday night when you're having a pizza. Even I don't. Did people ever ask you, they're like, what's your favorite wine? If you really love wine, you don't have a single favorite.
I never say I have a single favorite.
Well, you drink a lot. It depends how I feel. Depends. What's the weather outside? What do I want? What am I eating? And when I really like those Tuesday, Wednesday night wines that you drink that are beautiful, that do have authenticity and truth to them, but don't have to be overly refined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that your wines, considering that they're mainly Carignan, would you consider that they are, like we said earlier, that they're just very fruit forward, fruit friendly, medium to fuller bodied? I wouldn't say full bodied. I wouldn't say medium bodied, maybe somewhere in the middle. But
somewhere in the middle.
Very food friendly.
Very food friendly. High acidity for red wine. Not like a medium tannin. So not overly tannic or not a lot of tannin. I don't use any new oak. And Carignan is both fruity and earthy at the same time.
That's good to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's okay. I'm writing my notes and it's got a lot of really bright fruit characters and it's very fruit forward and the fruit is very fresh to sometimes even almost to a jammy because it's got that boysenberry, razzleberry note. But then there's this even herbal, like spicy, earthy character to it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It's just so interesting. I want to try wines that sound very interesting that I wouldn't necessarily recognize right away, especially the varietal. And so your wine interests me. And I hope it's interesting to the people that are listening, because up until I started to learn about your wines, I wasn't familiar with that varietal. And there's so many different varietals in the world, but learning everything there is to know and just that's one of the things I love about wine, is just finding something that sounds interesting and really unpackaging it and breaking it down.
Yeah.
And with the history and the terroir, it's funny you said you don't have a particular favorite wine. When anybody says, what's your favorite wine? I always say, it depends on where it's from. That's always my number one thing. And they say, oh, and I'm like, then I get into it and I'm like, yeah, like they'll say, somebody will ask me at the restaurant I work, they'll want me to, because I'm the sommelier there, and they'll say, what do you recommend? What white wine do you recommend? And I'll say, do you like dry? Do you like buttery? Do you like Chardonnays? I need to know what you like before I put something on the table that I like. Because the last thing I want you to do is have something that I tell you is good if you don't like it. And that's what makes wine so subjective.
Yeah. And wine is there's a lot of, the context matters. And so that's why I like to tell the stories of the wines that I make, because I think that context, like if you tasted Mule Plain or Testa or Sandy Lane without knowing the story, you might, hopefully you like them, but then knowing the story makes it so much more interesting. It makes you understand, so that's why Mule Plain, it's the Lodi, it's that fine deli sand. It's got this more fruity character, where the Redwood Valley, the Testa, is a different type of soil, a different place, a field blend. So not 100% Carignan. That's why it's got a darker, deeper flavor, and it's a bit more coverage in my mouth. Yeah, I like that story.
Yeah.
Different.
That's super cool. I want to jump in and talk about Quintessa. Quintessa is such a huge Cabernet brand. It's funny. Um, One night when I was working, I had some people come in and they were asking me at the table, what's a really good Cabernet? And they were looking in the area where Quintessa was on the list. And I'm like, you should try that one. That's a pretty good cab. And I got so excited and I sent you a picture of the wine.
Yeah.
And I remember you were excited to see that picture, but that love affair with recommending a wine to somebody, they've never even heard of the wine, and then getting the feedback and then texting you. And somebody said that I was working with, they were like, what's the bigger flex? You selling the wine or you texting the winemaker saying you sold me? I'm like, I'd rather take the flex on texting the winemaker.
Yeah, but isn't that great? And you made them happy.
Yeah, it was great.
You added a whole nother layer to their incredible experience.
Yeah, and they're gonna go back to Quintessa. They didn't walk away from that. And I remember the nose when the wine was so beautiful. It was a 19. It was
that's beautiful.
Really pretty purple. But talk about Quintessa. You've been the winemaker there since 2015. We're talking about volcanic soils, tons of different, like the soils in all the vineyard blocks are so different just in the vineyard.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around. What's fun with Quintessa is, like, through Quintessa, I feel like I've learned so much more about Napa Valley. Because Napa Valley is not, we talk a lot about our climate out in the greater world. People think of Napa Valley as a style, but Napa Valley is geologically, like, probably the most diverse geology in a wine region in the world. And Quintessa is like this little example of it, this little microcosm of it, because through the different vineyard blocks, and so Quintessa runs, it's in Rutherford, runs from the Silverado Trail, basically runs from the Vaca Mountains, which is the eastern mountain range in Napa, all the way to the Napa River. And as you go from the east to the west, and as you travel across Quintessa, you travel across these different geologies, and we have very different terroir, very different soil types as you traverse the property. Yeah. And that makes there's elevation and aspect. It's volcanic soils. They're not easy to farm. They're not that easy to understand. And it really makes you have to study it and be on your game to make it work.
Yeah, you also have a small batch of a Sauvignon Blanc called Illumination, but it's by Quintessa. It has a different label. So talk about the Sauvignon Blanc and why did Quintessa decide to go with a different label? Because originally I didn't correlate the two. So I thought it was pretty cool.
So Illumination started the white wine by Quintessa. So it's the partner to Quintessa. And it really started with a little block of Sauvignon Blanc planted on the Quintessa estate. And starting in 2006, started making a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc and only having it at the family's house and at the hospitality side, at the visitor center.
Yeah.
And it was, this always happens. You make a little bit of something, you're sharing it just for fun, and then people love it. And then you're like, wow, maybe I should make more.
Yeah.
But how to make a wine that could be the partner to Quintessa was the challenge with Illumination. And we weren't going to replant Quintessa to all these different white varieties. Yeah. And the unique character, the really special identity of Quintessa comes from the diversity of the soil and the blend. And so we needed to look for other vineyards to make that with Illumination. So Illumination is not a state. So that is why it doesn't just say Quintessa white.
Oh, got it.
So it's the partner to Quintessa, and the core of it is from the Quintessa estate, but then we worked with some vineyards in Sonoma Valley and in southern Napa Valley. And this is, I love Illumination. I love making it. Yeah. I get teased that I spend too much time and too much attention on it, but I also love drinking it. But it's something special. It's worthy of standing next to Quintessa because it's Sauvignon Blanc. barrel fermented in multiple different fermentation vessels. So you gain complexity, character there. It's a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. Sauvignon Blanc's got really bright acidity. Semillon has weight and body.
Yeah.
Putting all this together, no malolactic fermentation, you get this round and almost creamy texture from the barrel fermentation, from the portion of the Semillon, but bright acidity. And as a sommelier, like you need to have bright acidity
Absolutely
to make your mouth water.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just it's a wine that you can drink young. You could have as like a porch pounder. Like you don't even have to have food with it, but it's really easy to pair with food and it's ageable.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I love it when a big red brand is putting out a nice Sauvignon Blanc. And it almost feels like it's necessary today to have a good California Sauvignon Blanc. And I find it fascinating how intrigued you are, just how you have this love for that Sauvignon Blanc. It's almost like your baby.
It is. I do. I think that you can't drink only red wine.
Yeah.
You drink only one wine. And I think we can do really excellent and unique Sauvignon Blanc. I do think also the Sauvignon Blanc, it's getting the attention now that it deserves, but it is one of the great wine varieties in the world because it has the ability to make great wine in multiple different places, multiple different styles. So I think that Sauvignon is not just cheap and cheerful. It's finally people realizing it makes great wines that are worthy of attention and focus and value.
Very good for food. If I'm having certain foods and I'm thinking of a white wine, that's one of my first go-tos. And so I love that you shared a little bit in depth about illumination. I didn't know exactly what to expect, but that's super cool. Quintessa got a biodynamic certification, I believe, back in 2021. But did that change at all the way that you were practicing making wine? I feel like the certification doesn't necessarily change the practice, but what does it mean to have this certification moving forward?
Yeah, it means a lot and it doesn't mean as much. So Quintessa has been organic from day one. So Quintessa is also an organic vineyard. We only got our certification as well 2 years ago, but Quintessa has been farmed organically since it was started and farmed biodynamically since the mid-2000s completely. Biodynamics were first introduced at Quintessa in 96 and then implemented over the entire property. And both of those things, being organic and biodynamic, were driven by Valeria Huneeus. The owners are Augustin and Valeria Huneeus. And Valeria, she designed the vineyard. She insisted from day one that it be organic.
Yeah.
And then was introduced to biodynamics and believed in this as well. She didn't believe, and I agreed with her until very recently, that we don't do this for marketing purposes, so we don't need to be certified. But started to realize as more and more people, and we never talked about it either. We just did it, never talked about it. We started to realize as more and more people cared about how their food is grown, how their wine is made, that there was a lot of people talking about being this or that or regenerative or sustainable. And we would be like, oh, we're organic and biodynamic. And they'd say, well, are you certified? We say no. So being certified it is a very, especially Demeter biodynamic certification is very stringent, and it is a beautiful check mark and a kudos to the work that's been done at Quintessa. And then we can also show to our neighbors who we've been saying, like, why are you using Roundup? You should be organic. Look, we're doing it at Quintessa at a vineyard of size. It's 160 acres.
Yeah.
Doing it this way successfully. It's possible.
Yeah. When I'm in a restaurant, sometimes somebody will call me over, or it'll be my table, and they'll say, do you have any organic wines? And I'll go, yes, but are you looking for it on the label, or do you want me to just, but the idea, to go back to what you said, when you're thinking about the biodynamic or organic and things like that, it has become a popular topic.
Yes.
And so having that to show people, even though you've been practicing it for so long and other wineries have been practicing it for so long, it's still good to, like you said, just sit back and say, with the times, it is important to put it to get the certification.
I think it is. And to sort of battle that greenwashing thing, it is unfortunate that the labeling laws are such that there's a difference between organic farming and organic wine.
So I read something about how you like to encourage people before they go to school to work a harvest. And as we're wrapping the podcast up, talk to me a little bit about that. What did it mean for you to work your internship to get that feel of production before you went to school? And what do you think that does for somebody who's going to school to become a winemaker, to get the production in, to get the feet and the boots on the ground, to feel what it's like to be in there before you start going to school and learning in a textbook environment?
I think actually, sommeliers, everyone should work a harvest because it's a lot of fun. It's
It is a
really
lot of fun. It's dirty. It's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work, but it really, there's nothing that makes you understand more like how both rigorous and hardworking you have to be, but also how like magical winemaking is.
Mhm.
And I do think that before going to school, you should go work a harvest because the thing is, if you don't like harvest, you can be tired and sometimes you don't want to wake up at 4 a.m. But if you don't enjoy the work, you shouldn't be in. It's not for you.
No.
So it's a great work for 3 months and decide if you don't want to waste your 2 to 4 years in school. Because if you don't have fun doing it, then it's not for you. And you also like, working harvest, you appreciate the work of the workers. How it's a team, not one person. It's not the winemaker might be the one who gets to be on the website or be interviewed by you in the podcast, but you can't do it alone. It's a team of people, and every job is important. And if you don't clean correctly, you also learn that 70% of it's cleaning.
Totally. It's totally three-step sanitation.
Yeah, like in the post is bigger than the job itself.
Yeah. I feel like you were getting up at 2:00 when you were at Staglin, though. You weren't getting up at 4. Yeah, you were getting up early. That's a 2-person job.
Well, we were working like almost 24-hour cycle, but with only 2 shifts. It was brutal. So I was on the night shift. I was like the 3 p.m. to 3 a.m.
You know what? One thing I wish I would have had an extra pair of when I worked harvest is an extra pair of work boots. I know we got the rubber boots and that was great, and you didn't, but having an extra, my work boots, they started like the inside of the boots
pull apart.
Yeah, pulled apart. And then with all the water and everything, like I was wearing firefighter boots and they were good boots, but like after so much water, like I wish I had, wet feet. Yeah. That's nasty.
Yeah.
But I just wish I had another pair of boots because there was days where I remember that I had significant pain in my feet and I'm like just constantly walking around. I'm like using the forklift to move barrels around. I'm having
concrete floors. That's the other, you don't realize. And I get probably not every year, but every 5 years you get an intern who didn't quite realize how hard it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And just can't physically do it. Standing on concrete all day, walking around.
Yeah.
You have to have 4 pairs of socks.
Don't fall asleep doing a pump over too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You have to change your socks because they get super wet.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but it happens less now because we have auto pump overs. So
oh, there you go. That's nice.
I don't have to like physically be like getting like nerve damage from doing too many clamps. But I also used to get cracking in my hands. Yeah. And so like learning about Aquaphor before I went to bed and then putting a sock on.
My wife does that. She wears that now just for hand moisture. She puts some stuff on her hands and sleeps.
Like that. I'm ready.
She'll come to bed like this.
That's what I would do during harvest.
I'm like, you're freaking me out. Stop. So I have a couple more questions. The first one, with so much attention, you get so much attention. You have so many people that want to get a piece of you and learn about you and hear your story. What would you say is one of the most defining moments in your winemaking career? Or was there a person, for example, you've had the privilege to learn a lot from Michel Rolland and you learned from him at Rudd. And I'm sure you worked with him in other ways in other projects, but something like that. Or was there some thing that really inspired you or really pushed you, propelled you forward that you can look back on and that you like to share that story that not a lot of people may know about?
Now you got me thinking about people that have influenced me. And I actually work with Michelle now at Quintessa.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And Michelle is fabulous. I mean, think about the times you learn the most are the difficult the most difficult vintages.
That's true.
2017, 2020. And thinking about Michel, like having a consultant like Michel is so incredible, not just because of his palate and his skill set, it's his history. And I've also, I'm lucky enough to call Celia Welch my mentor.
She's
Celia
so
Welch.
incredible.
She's so incredible and modest and strong. And I remember it was 2011 vintage, having this rain, this very difficult year. And oh yes, this reminds me of like a 98. I'm thinking, or 89. I wasn't around. I was around, but I wasn't in the wine industry then. And that kind of history. Michel said something that for me, I think about all the time. So in 2020, we had the global pandemic, just the world, all this uncertainty in this world. And then we had an early fire season in California.
Worse than 17.
Not as scary as 17, but worse than 17.
Yeah.
17 was a little bit uncontrolled because we weren't prepared for it. And then no cell phone, like the cell phone towers going down and all of that. In 2020, the response was better, like CAL FIRE response and the communication was better, but they happened earlier.
Yeah.
And so we had the potential of smoke damaging the grapes. And you heard a lot of people reacting very emotionally, which is natural. To live through fire is very emotional.
Yeah.
And saying that we can't make wine, vintage is over. And I didn't believe that. I thought we could try. And certainly we have fires in California all the time. It's not really that different. And I talked to Michel about it because he couldn't come visit. And I was emailing with him. And I was like, what's your history? What would you, he's worked around the world. He's worked in British Columbia. That's had a lot of fire experience. What would you do? And he said, Rebekah, you make the best wine you can. And then you taste it after and you decide what to do, what you can do. You don't change before you start. Make wine. This is what you do. And you do it the best that you can.
That's crazy.
That's what you do.
Just keeping it basic. Just step back and know that you have everything you need. Like you are who you are. Like, and I'm speaking about you specifically and others like you, but you are the best at what you do. Like you could put other people in your shoe, but like it's you and it's him, right? The two of you are iconic in your own way talking to each other about this. And it's like, it's such valuable information, and that's good information just in general.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we could all just sit back and just process and not overthink. Everything could be great.
Yeah. And understand sometimes you're going to fail.
Which is
can't
good.
succeed all the time. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but you have to try.
Yeah.
And for me, that was his lesson, and that was the lesson of 2020. And we made great wine. We had to try. You have to be willing to try.
I'm glad you mentioned Celia Welch. I think Celia Welch is one of the most, I can't even describe how incredible of a winemaker she is.
She is the best. She has this touch, and she's just, I was like, matter of fact about it. Like she just quietly is incredible. Like,
it's so amazing.
Yeah.
She's Staglin too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like she's OG and it's like, she's everything.
Yeah.
Well, Rebekah, tell people how they can find you. Tell people how they can learn more about you, whether it's about Post and Vine or Quintessa, maybe some social media spots. And I'm going to link all this in the show notes too for people.
So for Post and Vine, the easiest way to find us is our website, Post and Vine, allwrittennow.com. And I do love some social media. I like Instagram.
You do. You're pretty good on Instagram.
I like it. I like that.
You have great stories too, by the way.
Oh, I'm a little tired, so I have a lot of pictures of the harvest. I like to share some of the fun stuff and entertain myself. So I'm on Instagram at Rebekah Wineburg, and then also at Post and Vine Wines, and it's me posting. I enjoy talking to people. I think that wine is about connections that you make, and then you get to meet cool people and share an experience and have something in common and have a good time.
That's all linked for everybody listening. So go check it out. Go click the links, get some wine. Have fun. Check out everything Post and Vine, Quintessa, Illumination. My last question for you today, when you look back on your career, when you look back on your life, before wine, there was no idea that there was going to be wine. And here you are today. You're massively successful. You're very impressive to me. And I know a lot of people look up to you. So if there's somebody that's listening right now, maybe they're in your shoes before, or say they're in a spot where they're considering the wine industry, or maybe they're working the harvest, but early on, and you have some advice to give to them that would be very valuable, that looking back on your time was a valuable thing for you to learn at that moment. What kind of advice would you give any of those people?
I think one of the best things that I did, and it's crazy when that you say that because I still feel like I'm like, don't know. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, I'm not, but I still feel like I'm young and I don't know where I am and what I'm doing. And you're saying I'm here, I'm there. It's weird. I don't know how it happened. But I think one of the best things that I did early in my career, had time, and when I could do it, is that I knew I wanted to be a winemaker, but I also went and I worked in retail. And that's where I learned how to communicate about wine and talk to people. So I never worked in service. I never worked in restaurants. I wish I had, but I think that ability to suss out, you're saying, ask people, what is it that you're looking for? What do you want? How do I talk about wine? Not technically, because when you're talking winemaker to winemaker, you can talk very technically.
Yeah,
But
you
when
can
you
use
talk to
numbers.
people, yeah, when you talk to people, or laundry lists of things you're tasting, or acronyms, when you're talking to people, it's about, how does the wine make you feel? What's the story behind it? When they say that when people come in and say they like, what do you like? And just learning how to talk to people and make people feel comfortable about wine, because that's something that we really need to do. And winemakers, I did not know this. Like, I thought that, certainly coming out of like a scientific kind of background, I thought what you did is you did your work and you like kept your head down and you're very technical about it, and then people would just understand it. But no, you have to tell the story.
Yeah.
Winemaking is storytelling.
Yeah. And I think telling the story, having you on the podcast, one thing I love about my podcast is I get to get in depth with the person. And I always tell people, you may like Quintessa, Post and Vine, you may like Illumination, but maybe you don't know about the person behind the brand. And a lot of times people are looking for connection. We live in a very story driven time, and stories are huge. Stories are everything. And just, I'm more fascinated today, and I've always been fascinated with my podcast about the person behind the wine, because there's so many different caveats to the journey. It's weird because we zigzag back and forth with how everything worked together with your story. And sometimes people can relate in their own way. They can see something that you went through, or they can feel the serendipitous moments in the full circle. And they can say, wow, I didn't know who she was, and I already liked their wine, but I can relate to this girl because I'm going through some stuff that she was going through trying to figure it out. So with that being said, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your journey, but also thank you for being so focused on terroir. I know we talked about that in the beginning, but you're very much about the place. And I think the place is very important in wine, especially today. I think today marketing is really becoming so strong that it may take away from the meaning or the voice within the bottle, because there's so much going on with the labeling or with the marketing, which is good. But I think having that terroir to speak, and having somebody like yourself who tells the story so well because you're so passionate about it, I think that's very important. But ultimately, Rebekah, I love the fact that I had you on the podcast today, because I think you're a huge inspiration in wine and in just in life, going after your dreams, knowing that you want to do something, not being afraid to do it. And I hope, if anything, people have learned something a little bit about that from you today.
Thank you. My pleasure.